We're going to dive deep into a moment that really helped define the end of the 20th century. We're talking about Ronald Reagan and a single powerful phrase he used that just completely changed America's relationship with the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is how his background as a film actor, of all things, gave him the tools to step onto the world stage and, use the power of words to shift history. His time on a movie set was almost perfect training.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Who was the man behind the microphone?
Well, Ronald Reagan was born way back in 1911 in a tiny town, Tampico, Illinois. He had a pretty standard Midwestern upbringing.
He ended up at Eureka College studying economics and sociology, played some football, but his first real job was all about his voice.
Right, and that's the key. His deep, clear voice landed him a job as a radio sports announcer in Iowa. Think about those skills: clarity, pacing, making an audience feel the action. That broadcasting skill set was the cornerstone of everything he did later.
And that voice eventually took him to California, right, to Hollywood.
Yep. A screen test led to a long career as an actor. He was in dozens of movies, became a household name. Americans felt like they already knew him.
But he was doing more than just acting. He got some serious political training while he was there.
Oh, absolutely. He served as president of the Screen Actors Guild. This was a powerful union, and that role forced him to negotiate, to manage people, to lead. He was developing leadership skills long before he ever ran for office.
His politics also changed over time. He started out as a Democrat, but his views shifted.
A pretty dramatic shift. By the 1960s, he was a full-blown Republican, favoring smaller government, lower taxes, a much harder line on foreign policy.
And that new political identity worked for him. He was elected governor of California in 1966.
Served 2 full terms. Then, in 1980, he wins the presidency in a landslide. And he arrives at the White House with this completely unique background, a professional communicator ready to take on the world.
So when he gets to Washington, he's immediately nicknamed the Great Communicator.
And he absolutely leaned into it. He used his experience as an actor to connect with millions of Americans on TV and radio. He didn't just read speeches, he performed them.
He used stories, humor. He had this really optimistic tone.
Exactly. He emphasized freedom, individual liberty, all those classic American ideals. And he practiced. He rehearsed like an actor to make sure every pause, every word had the right impact. Yeah. He didn't sound like a typical politician, and that was his strength.
But to understand why this was so important, you have to remember the global context. We're talking about the Cold War.
Right. For 40 years, it was this intense global competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. And it was all driven by 2 fundamentally different ideas about how society should work.
On one side, you have the U.S. supporting democracy and capitalism.
Free elections, private ownership, all that. Mm-hmm. And on the other, the Soviet Union with its communist system, a single-party state, total government control of the economy.
And we call it the Cold War because the 2 superpowers never actually fought each other directly in a big, hot war.
Instead, it was proxy wars, spy games, and this terrifying decades-long arms race.
And that's the core danger, right? The nuclear weapons.
A huge number of them on both sides. It created this constant global fear of what was called mutually assured destruction. It was just a massive, costly competition for influence and military power.
And by the time Reagan took office, the U.S. policy was something called détente.
Right, which basically meant easing tensions, trying to cooperate with the Soviets. It was sort of accepting their system as a permanent fact of life. Reagan rejected that completely. He believed the U.S. needed to be much, much stronger to face down that threat.
Okay, so that brings us to the speech. March 8th, 1983. Where is he giving this speech?
He's in Orlando, Florida, speaking at the annual convention of the National Association of Evangelicals. This is a group known for its strong traditional religious values.
So a very specific audience.
The perfect audience for what he wanted to do. He used that setting to talk about morality in American society, arguing that national strength came from the character and beliefs of the people. It was the perfect backdrop for a simple, powerful, moral argument.
And then comes the line that sent shockwaves around the world. He defines the Soviet Union as
an evil empire.
Just like that. So direct.
And it was completely intentional. He wasn't just calling them a rival. He was calling their entire system morally illegitimate. He argued that it crushed religious freedom, denied individual rights, and just operated outside the basic moral values of the West.
But wait, wasn't that a massive political risk? For decades, presidents had used such careful, guarded language to avoid a crisis.
A huge risk. But the calculation was that the soft language hadn't worked. He believed détente had failed. His goal was to expose what he saw as the moral weakness of the Soviet system on the world stage.
So by calling it an evil empire, he was signaling a complete change in strategy.
Exactly. He was telling the Soviet leadership that the U.S. would no longer treat them as a moral equal. He wanted to make it absolutely clear where America stood.
And that speech was basically a full rejection of an idea called moral equivalence.
Right, so moral equivalence is this idea that in a big conflict like the Cold War, both sides are basically equally flawed, equally responsible for all the problems.
I see. The argument that, well, the U.S. has nuclear weapons, the Soviets have nuclear weapons, so they're the same.
Precisely. And Reagan argued that was just wrong. He insisted there was a fundamental difference between a system built on freedom and one built on oppression.
Mm.
He saw it as a moral duty for the U.S. to stand up for liberty.
And this moral argument was directly tied to his military strategy, his policy of peace through strength.
It's a simple concept, really. You have such a powerful military that no enemy would even think about attacking you. You don't get peace by being weak. You get it by being unquestionably strong.
And he backed that up with action. His presidency saw this huge increase in defense spending.
A massive increase. It was all aimed at modernizing the military and making sure America was technologically superior to the Soviets.
The most dramatic example of that was the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI.
Right, SDI.
Yeah.
His critics nicknamed it Star Wars. It was this incredibly ambitious plan to use space-based systems to build, essentially, a shield to protect the U.S. from incoming nuclear missiles.
A high-tech shield against nuclear attack, was that even possible?
Well, many scientists said the technology wasn't there yet, and the Soviets were absolutely furious. They said it would just escalate the arms race. But whether it was feasible or not, it had a huge strategic impact.
Oh, so?
It terrified the Soviet Union. They knew they simply could not afford to keep up with that level of technological investment.
Yeah.
And that economic pressure was a key part of the strength strategy.
So this whole approach, the tough talk, the military buildup, it marked a final end to that previous policy of détente.
A complete reversal. Instead of easing tensions, Reagan's policy was to actively challenge Soviet influence everywhere.
And that wasn't just talk.
Not at all. It meant supporting groups fighting communist governments in places like Afghanistan and cutting off the flow of technology and money to pressure the Soviet economy. The belief was that the system was a hollow shell, and if you pushed hard enough, it would collapse.
So as you can imagine, the reaction to the evil empire speech was intense.
Oh, absolutely. Moscow was furious. Soviet leaders called it warmongering, American aggression. They were worried it would kill all diplomacy.
And what about America's allies in Europe?
Some of them were pretty nervous, too. They thought the harsh language might hurt negotiations. But here's the other side of it. For people living under communist rule in Eastern Europe, it was electrifying.
It gave them hope.
A huge amount of hope. They finally heard the leader of the free world acknowledging their struggle in simple, powerful, moral terms.
And what's so interesting is that despite the harsh words, Reagan was still willing to negotiate.
But only from a position of strength. And that opportunity came in 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev became the Soviet leader. Gorbachev started introducing reforms, a new openness. He was willing to talk.
And Reagan and Gorbachev held several historic summits.
They did, and the biggest result was the 1987 INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was a massive breakthrough. It eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles from Europe.
So his earlier strategy of pressure and strength is often credited with forcing the Soviets to the bargaining table.
That's the argument, yes, that it pressured them to negotiate in good faith. By the time Reagan left office in 1989, the Cold War was drawing to a peaceful close.
And just a few months after he left office, the Berlin Wall fell.
The ultimate symbol of that division coming to an end. The Evil Empire speech is really seen as a key turning point. It just shows the immense power of words to shape political reality.
It solidified his reputation as a leader who used communication skills he learned in Hollywood to challenge a superpower and just redefine the rules of the game.
It proves that sometimes choosing the right words and sticking to your values can be an incredibly effective weapon.
It really makes you think. Could a single polarizing phrase still have that much power in our world today? Or has our 24/7 media landscape made things too complicated for that kind of clear-cut moral confrontation? Something for you to ponder. Good luck with your studies.